On this episode of Hot Rod Hoarders, we're checking out a collection of historic race cars at the North Carolina Auto Racing Hall of Fame in Mooresville, North Carolina. Now this is a small museum, it's not some kind of big massive place, but every car here has history, every car has a story, and the guy who runs this place knows it all, and he is passionate about old race cars. In fact, he was around for those good old days. He drag raced back in the 60s and moved more into stock car racing and things like that later in his racing career. But this guy, his name is Don Miller, and he's originally from the Chicago area, and he actually played a pretty big role in developing the UDRA, the United Drag Racers Association. Even though he was a drag racer early on in his career, he got heavily involved in stock car racing in the 1970s and eventually became the president of Penske Racing South. During his huge career, and especially after he retired from his career, he got really involved in the history of racing and trying to preserve some of these historic cars and be able to tell the stories of these cars and these old tracks and these series that really made racing what it is today. And part of that process for him was developing the North Carolina Auto Racing Hall of Fame. And he wanted this to include a museum, and he wanted to be able to pay tribute to some of those pioneers of the sport, especially ones that were based out of North Carolina. I had the opportunity to visit this museum while I was on the Great Race. So again, it was kind of a short trip, but I enjoyed every minute I got to spend with Don and every minute I got to spend with his collection, because everything here has a cool story behind it. And I want to tell you some of that here, but I also want to encourage you to go check this place out. I know that if you're into racing history, you'll love this place. So as soon as we walk in the door, there's a killer barn find, a 1940 Ford coupe, and this thing looks like it was literally just dragged out of the barn. There's still pine needles and nuts and things on it. This thing is as authentic as you can get for a 1960s hot rod. Now it does have an engine swap. It didn't have its original flathead in there. It's got a tried and true small block Chevrolet with 3 two-barrel carburetors, and just a killer hot rod right here. Original old school paint. Everything about this car is original, so it's cool to see this thing. And it was surrounded by a really cool little shop display with some engines up on stands and some cool parts displayed all around it. From there, we made our way back into an area that was mainly centered around miniature cars, so go-karts and things like that. And the one that really caught my attention is this Lafayette quarter midget race car. Now, the reason this caught my attention, number one, they're really cool to look at. These things have a cool body, but what really got me is that my dad just bought one of these things from an estate sale just a little while ago, and I'm planning on doing a video on that thing soon. I'm just gathering all the details I can, trying to document any history I can get on this car before I put a video out there, so stay tuned for that. Here is a Chrysler 300 series, and this is a pioneer of stock car racing because this is really where the Hemi came into play. Now there were small Hemis and all sorts of different cubic inches that came before this, but this is really where it started to get serious with the 354, the 392. They were really building up horsepower, and this is the perfect example of that type of car. And in front of it here, you'll see several examples of Daytona trophies, and a lot of these are from where they raced on the beach, and they are authentic and really just impossible to find. You're not going to find these at a swap meet or a flea market. Now this car's a little bit confusing because it has lettered right on the side of it Mercury 300, and the Mercury branding was actually Mercury outboard engines, so it's a little bit confusing. It's a Chrysler with Mercury on the side, but still a very meaningful car. The next car we're going to talk about is actually a Mercury. It's the Treasure Island Motel Special, and it was driven by Tim Flock. This car has a Y-block based engine with 2 4s, and it's got tons of trick suspension components on it. Now it's still very basic and bare bones, but they would add dual shock absorbers and things like that to kind of give a little more adjustability and give a little more strength and longevity on these cars, because it was really a matter of endurance in a lot of cases. Next to it is a 1960 championship car. This was Rex White's 1960 Chevrolet, and it's got a 348W engine in there. And he's still involved with the North Carolina Auto Racing Hall of Fame. He comes to special events, and he comes to hang out with Don all the time. As we make our way down the line, we got a 1939 Ford Coupe. It's got Smith's Auto Parts lettered on it. Really neat, traditional, old school stock car. And then next to it is a really special car. This is a Ford Can-Am car. It's got a Boss 429 based engine in it. And the paint that you see here, this slick blue paint, that is original paint that has been sanded and buffed and cleaned up. It is unbelievable how well preserved this car is. And Don said this car was found in a barn or in a building in Georgia, and they brought this thing out and completely just cleaned it, pieced it back together, and made this thing look like this. I mean, it's amazing that this car looks the way it does. On this other row, we see some more vintage stock cars, starting with a late 50s Ford Thunderbird, and then we've got a 1957 Chevy, iconic body style, and these cars were perfect for stock car racing. In fact, they used the frames from 1955 to 1957 Chevys under a lot of different stock cars for lots of years. Then we've got a 1955 Ford named the Purple Hog, and next to it is a Hudson Hornet. And you know, if you've seen the movie Cars, you know the fabulous Hudson Hornet. It really got famous in the modern era because of that movie. But these cars were legitimately famous back in the day because they were top performers and they had a flathead 6-cylinder engine. It's really unbelievable that they could outrun an overhead valve V8 with this flathead 6-cylinder. It was just a really iconic car. This is another cool one here. As we make our way around the corner, these are some of my favorite cars right here in a row. First is Tony Eury Sr.'s semi-modified Mustang. And this thing is cut all to pieces. It's really wild looking. The tires stick out. Really crazy looking 70s race car. I love the looks of these things. And you can't find a much better body style to cut up than an early 70s Mustang. They just look cool whether they're stock or turned into a race car. And then next to it is the number 66 Pontiac that was raced in the Busch Grand National Series. This was raced by Rusty Wallace, and this car is restored beautifully. This thing is slick, probably slicker than it ever was on the racetrack. Beautiful restoration on this car. And finishing out this row is an IROC race car. I used to love watching this racing series when I was younger. You know, you'd get basically the all-stars of all different types of racing and put them all in matching cars and go out there and see who was the best. And it produced some pretty good racing action there for a while. This car was actually campaigned by Ken Schrader, an iconic racer who's still out there burning up the tracks today. On one of these back walls is a bunch of racing engines, which I always love to take a look at those. We've got all sorts of different engine platforms. We've got a Ford NASCAR engine. We've got a Buick V6. We've got a K-Tech small block Chevrolet. And then we've got an injected Buick V6. And then a turbo Buick V6 IndyCar engine. This thing is a pretty rare piece, and it looks like it just came straight out of the car and right here on a stand for everybody to see. And then finishing off this row of racing engines is an early Hemi with 2 4s on it. One of the really cool items that may not just jump out there and grab you is this 1969 Dodge Daytona Wing. Now, this was outlawed and confiscated by NASCAR officials, and it came off of the Buddy Baker Harry Hyde car back in the day. And no racing museum is complete without a couple of Petty cars. We've got a Richard Petty car and a Kyle Petty car. And then we've also got a Harry Gant Skull Bandit car. I used to love this car as a kid. Other cool cars include the famous number 2 Miller car driven by Rusty Wallace. Then we've got the Ryan Newman Taurus, the Darrell Waltrip number 17 car. And then carrying on in this row, we've got Lake Speed number 15 Thunderbird. And then we've got Richie Evans' really cool modified Pinto. In the back of the museum, there's some miniature models, and these things are really interesting. You'll see different variations of it, from a wooden version to an aluminum version to a complete version. And these are actually miniature models used for wind tunnel testing. They're built to scale, and these things had huge amounts of engineering built into them. They were actually used to develop the aero packages on cars back in the 80s and 90s. Really important stuff right here. And somehow or another, Don got his hands on these things, and he's got them on display here in the museum. So of course, I had to check out the drag racing portion of this museum. I'm always drawn to that kind of stuff because I love drag racing and old hot rods and things like that. And Don's got a great collection here, including a car that he built to replicate his original race car, which was a Chevy 2 Gasser that he raced all across the Midwest. And you know how it goes, you sell these old race cars and you don't really know how to get them back. So he ended up replicating this car down to, some pretty close details. He didn't go all the way back exactly original, but he did go back with a traditional stance and a traditional setup as far as a gasser goes. Another one of Don's old race cars is this front engine dragster. He said he actually owned this car back in the day, 1963 to be exact, and it was called the El Dorado. And the reason for that name is that it's got a fuel-injected Cadillac engine in it. Now, this car was an A-gas dragster, and Don was able to buy this car back and restore it to its former glory. It's a really cool piece. Next to it is another dragster style car. This is more of a competition coupe, and it's got a Fiat body on it. And this thing has two NASCAR style engines on it that are turned 90 degrees. This thing is a wild setup. It's got headers going everywhere, and I'm not sure exactly what this thing runs as far as an ET, but I'm sure that it makes a cool noise, and I'm sure that it smokes those tires without any problem. A couple more modern drag cars that are on display in here is an Al Hoffman funny car. This would be from the 90s or early 2000s. And then we've got the famous McDonald's top fuel car that was driven by Corey McClenathan. Another old drag car that I really love is Ed McLeod's 1963 Corvette convertible. Now, this thing has been in storage since 1970. It was originally based out of New Jersey. This thing ran with a fuel-injected small block, and this thing only has 23,000 miles on it. It is a beautifully preserved car, absolutely cool. It's got 5-spoke wheels on the front, steel wheels on the back, skinny Superstock style slicks on the back. Just a timeless old school race car right here. And I can't help it that I'm a little bit partial to light blue Corvettes of this generation since I got one here in the garage. Later in his career, Don Miller also got involved in land speed racing, and he built this Model A, and this thing's got all the tricks in the book. It is a killer piece, and this car ran in the street roadster category, XFB to be exact. Absolutely killer that it's on display in here because it is preserved 100% the way it ran on the salt flats. One of the cool things to me is all the memorabilia, all the different items that he's collected over the years. And lots of people have donated these items, and they allow them to sit here on display. Sometimes they also get auctioned off, they get sold off, and again, that helps the Hall of Fame and the museum to be able to operate and to be able to provide this display for people to come and see. And some of the cars here are on loan, so sometimes it switches out. It's not always this same exact collection, so it's definitely worth checking out a couple different times so you can see some different variations. But I enjoyed being able to walk around in here and check out some of these things and hear Don tell me the story on some of these cars. And obviously I'd love to spend more time with him. Hopefully I can go back another day and let him tell me some more stories about some of these cars, and maybe there'll be some different cars in here as well. But I wanted to show you this collection, and I want to encourage you to check out places like this because they got to have some people in there to keep the interest up, to keep a few dollars circulating, and it's really important to preserve these old race cars. And the North Carolina Auto Racing Hall of Fame is a great place to find out more about what racing used to be like and how it got to the point it is today. So I hope you enjoyed this quick look at his collection. Definitely check it out when you're in the area. Thank you for watching.